basically, the presentation today is the futures of the world system, Prout, and the grand transition. It does give me a great deal of pleasure to do a brief introduction of our presenter today, Professor Sohail Inayatullah. I guess I will resist going into too much detail about his incredible life experience and career, because I think it would take all of the hour we have with him. But just to be very brief, basically, he's a political scientist, a futurist, and a student of a longtime student of P.R. Sarkar. He is actually the sitting UNESCO chair of future studies. He is on the faculty of universities in Taiwan and Australia. Based on the highest impact of citations, he's actually in the top 2% of the world scientists, which is a real credit again to his work and the scope and depth of his work. He's a widely published author. I have really appreciated Anticipation to Emancipation Toward the State, a Stage Theory of the Uses of the Future. I would highly recommend that to people. He has many other publications that I would also recommend. He routinely works with people at the highest levels of government, large corporations, and other organizations. I think he just recently finished spending a couple of days with the Thai Justice Institute. And maybe it can go without being said, given that resume, but he travels extensively, and in fact is presenting from Dubai, where he just arrived yesterday, which I think in many respects makes him really a citizen of the world rather than just an individual country. So at this time, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for all your wonderful emails. Traveling, as you know, is not so much fun. Jet lag is not so much fun, irrespective of how much mindfulness one does. It's always a challenge. But it's great to be with everyone here, and I hope these comments will be of use. My style on Zoom is pretty quick, but I think there's a recording you can go over later, and there's text you can read later. So I will start over here straight away. I'm hoping you can see my screen. Yep.
Yes.
All good. So I think to go big picture, if we go day to day, certainly it can be terrifying for some people, but our role in social scientists is to go deep and to go broad. So there's this Russian thinker, physicist, and he talked about what's called the Kardashev scale. And his research question is quite unique. He said, why is there no empirical evidence of first contact? And when you start with that question, he then goes further. He said, let's create a macrohistory, as again, P.R. Sarkar did. But instead of going with social structure, he said, if we see macrohistory as across planets, across universes, the only thing we can conclude is there's one thing that every species, as it gains sentience, discovers, which is periodic table of elements. Once you discover that, you're obviously creating energy. And he says you have something called type 0 planets. They're planets that need energy, but their political system is divided by religion and by nation state. And that's that their energy needs expands, their social division leads to only one conclusion, which is destruction. So the reason why we don't get calls from aliens on a daily basis is because everyone gets to our stage in human civilization and destroys themselves, either through nuclear destruction or through climate change. It gets too hot. So that's hypothesis one. Then he concludes we're in a similar situation, that the Earth is destined for self-destruction unless two things happen. The contradiction between energy and governance has to be resolved. The only way to resolve that is through a global governance system, beyond religion, beyond nation state. The only way to have the right energy is to go solar. Well, whether sending Dyson solar ships near the sun or full renewable integration of renewables, that's the only way forward. He said that will take 100 years, maybe 300 years. Once we've done that, then we were a type 1 civilization. The next step is a type 2 civilization, which is how do you ensure that you're not destroyed by asteroids? That takes up to 1,000 years. And then you leave the planet and go throughout the solar system. Your energy needs expand. And finally, you eventually get in 1,000 years to a type 3 civilization. In fact, you're a spiritual civilization or a virtual civilization, and you're galactic. So he sees these stages over the next 1,000 years. I think what's useful for us is to make this case that unless we transform energy and governance, we're essentially doomed. All of us who are students of PR Sarkar, he would say we should all be optimistic. I think that's very clear, but this core contradiction has to be resolved. I was in Bangkok, I think a month ago. That was last week as well, working with the UN there. It was a project called UN 2045. And of course, it's the usual, how do we transform the UN so veto powers are not done by the same 5 players? That we had UN 1.0, League of Nations, UN 2.0, which we have today, but unless we transform to a UN 3.0, we're in real trouble. So I felt very lucky because I had some UN directors in the room. So I said, we understand the systemic changes, but if as the narrative gives meaning, gives story, makes sense of reality, what's the metaphor we live in today? And a very bright person, one of the lights in the room, he said, the UN is a referee with a small whistle. The players on the pitch are unruly. And I went further, and they all think they're Lionel Messi, God's gift. So right now, it's a referee with a small whistle. And I said, well, what would be a better metaphor for the UN? And he said, football coach. So now I took that, but I think football coach is knowledge, and I know he wants to be part of the knowledge regime. But maybe there's a better story. So let me ask our participants out there using the chat function, what might be a better story? He said, coach, what might be a better story in terms of some of the core ideas of Prout and other progressive movements throughout the world? From coach to what? So if people can use the chat function, write something there. I can't quite see the chat. I'm on a very small P. Oh, there it is. Okay. Homeostat, okay. A system that measures up and down, that adjusts. Complex system, fantastic, not bad. Dada Mahesh Fernanda suggests a multicultural family. That's not bad too. Others? So we have 2 suggestions. What's a better metaphor than coach? Okay, universalism is ideal. It's a goal, a vision. But from coach to what? So if we have to transform the core metaphor of a global governance system, what would that look like? Because our hypothesis is you can't change anything without changing the story. Okay, there's one, Carl suggests again, okay, Mark suggests Sadvipra. Okay, from a coach to Sadvipra. Okay, Sadvipra, those of you who are not fluent in Sanskrit, it's someone who has the characteristics of serving, protecting, innovating, and ensuring finances flow to all. So that's not bad. So that's kind of a quite dramatic shift. When I ran this, I was in Bangkok with the Institute for Justice there, working on inclusive justice. They suggested it should be a jury or a regulator. They all said you cannot have a global governance player with no implementation power. It can't, that's as Kardashev would argue, you're ensuring systemic collapse. There's only one way the system will collapse unless we shift the core story there. Now, when we try to shift the story, my lived experience with, I would say, almost 500 to 1,000 organizations, I love the conductor of an orchestra, is that most people experience themselves as being in a castle surrounded by hungry wolves. Inside the castle, there's alignment. Outside the castle, there's risk. And so to get organizations to change is challenging because they assume risk everywhere. Every war, every country who's gone through trauma, the wolves become more real every day. Now, our situation today is the wolves that become even more dramatic. the ecological wolves, the aging wolf, the inequity wolf, the AI wolf, and of course, the deeper part, who are we, where are we going? So we're in a situation of destabilization, disequilibrium. Clearly, those of you who are political economists would understand this figure here in terms of since 1989, the wealthy have become dramatically more wealthy. So I guess the issue that I want to ask is, can we make the transition to, as Kardovich says, a type 1 planet? Can we make the transition to gender partnership, which we know leads to increased wealth? One of my colleagues, Dwayne Elgin, he suggested the way to see this is the world is like a teenager. It's gone from childhood to a teenager. Teenagers, if those of you remember high school, you're in cliques, always afraid of the bully, always anxious. And so he says, right now we're a teenager reflecting on the possibility of adulthood, but far from being adults. And I found that a very powerful way to think about the future. So really, we're in a situation financially where we have one measurement, GDP. Can we make the transition, as we've been working with the New Zealand government most recently, to go to the 5P system, which is prosperity, people, planet, partnership, and purpose. And I put that there last because in almost every work I do, unless the accountants are happy, the vision and the strategy falls apart. The accountants are the arms of the capitalists, those of you, again, focus on the political economy. But the notion is we have to be able to measure where we wish to go. Otherwise, measurements will force us to where we were before. So GDP is an idea, but it upholds the entire system that I think all of us would agree needs to transform. Those of you, again, students of PR Sarkar, the argument is we've entered galloping time, heterogeneous realities, which is scary, but also enhances your ability to have influence and impact. I think John was saying about Nina having impact in the US on rethinking the role of Palestinians in the US. So the argument made again in Sarkar's language is Prama has been lost. When equilibrium is lost, we usually go back to the good old days, make something great again, or we stay with the present. The challenge here is to keep on moving, to create a new present, to have a dynamic equilibrium, which is harder than we think. There's no pause per se. Well, there's a pause as we rest, but as equilibriums fall apart, it's generally we go backwards. Make X great again. Our challenge in progressive forces is to keep on moving forward. So if you use this method that we use called the futures triangle, the suggestion here is there's three aspects of it: the vision, the new equilibrium, the pushes, whether it's technology, aging society, demand for gender equality, and there's the weight of history, the dogma dance. So see all social phenomena as having three attributes: the pull, where we wish to go, the push, the drivers, and this weight of history. And then which one wins out is, of course, dependent on how attractive the pull is. If there's enough pushes, momentum that's measurable that can take us forward. Now, again, this return to the imagined past is what we're facing everywhere: racial, medical, nature, and class purity, Varna purity in the Indian system. This gets expressed in the work of Sarkar. He talks about why did Ayurvedic system, which was holistic, integrated, lose out to the Western system? And his conclusion, it was a fear of injections. The inability to adopt new technologies to actually create the new equilibrium led to Ayurveda actually losing out to the Western system. As new technologies come in, unless we integrate them in wise ways, then again, we lose the equilibrium. So business as the present, the usual future, we know from the argument I just made, Kardashev, Sarkar, and the data we're seeing cannot continue. So our goal is to create something new. When I was 6 and we moved to the US, I remember this: each day Humboldt supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier, suggesting that, of course, we have changed equilibrium. Now, one corporation actually is going to hang its mantle on the ability to melt glaciers. So that's the setup here. Then you start to ask yourself, well, what could the future be? So I get that asked all the time. And clearly, once you've done any research, you get convinced that we don't know. It's contingent, it's open, it's being co-created through spirit, through structure, and through agency, our ability. So what are some of these scenarios? Scenario one, those of you on the right, is the invisible hand. It's no change, members only. With the UN veto system, only 5 members, or the global political economy, only the rich. And it succeeds, as my colleague Ben Kirkfleet said. He said, why don't the poor smite the rich? He said, because the poor want to be the rich. They want to be Musk or Bezos. So aspirationally, they want more. To shut that off in Gandhian political economy doesn't work, because people want to be like the rich. Their imagination is there. The cost of the invisible hand metaphor is the precariat keep on growing. They've lost jobs, they're in an open system, but the open system has no support. Scenario two is, of course, World Economic Forum. Whether you like them or dislike them, they have lots of progressive people there saying if we want to keep the system alive, capitalism, it must expand. Whether it's the UN Security Council or the entire global political economy, we have to include new members, minorities, what's called shareholder capitalism. Bring everyone into the capitalist game. Now, the weakness of this is partnership, but still run from the top. Females would argue they're gaining equal pay, but still have to do the majority of housework. So generally, there's future washing here and greenwashing. Now, scenario three is far more interesting to me. This is creative destruction comes in, you have new innovation cycles. What's called the Kondratiev curve. We've now entered a new Kondratiev curve. That's from artificial intelligence, the transparent brain, bioinformatics. There's a wave of dramatic new technologies, whether you like or dislike. There's a great book called The Algorithms of Oppression. But they're going to destroy the old system and create a new system. And there's really not much anyone can do about that. So there's a K curve, and we're starting the ascension process. Now, in this K curve, the intriguing part here, part of the success of the new technologies, is new platforms. Among the most interesting parts for those of us involved in the Prout movement are platforms that are cooperative, what's called platform cooperativism. If you look at Uber, it goes from challenging the efficiency of the taxi system, corporate, thus it works, but the weakness of Uber drivers don't have income coming to them. They're not the shareholders. So that's the next stage where we have global cooperativism. That's the only way you can start to deal with aging. It's a real triple bottom line. And it's a way where artificial intelligence plus peer-to-peer leads to a dramatic new future, what we call shared hands. So this goes from the linear economy to the circular economy to the far deeper regenerative life model economy. Now, any one of these slides you can spend 6 months on. But as I said earlier, there's a broad overview, not the details of any particular model. Though, as I suggested, the platform cooperative economy is really about using peer-to-peer to add value. It's been slow, but if you add AI to it, its possibility is quite transformative. Our last 3 days working with the Justice Institute in Bangkok, one of the most interesting ideas there was, can we use AI and P2P to rewrite the Thai constitution? Can we use AI and P2P to develop a hologram Buddha? They said a guru one tap. The Buddha appears to you when you need him. And that can only happen through 2 mechanisms, the wisdom of peer-to-peer and artificial intelligence. So this was one of the fantastic images we saw when a project on infrastructure in the future of the New Zealand economy was called Sharing is Winning. Now, the fourth is the radical change. And I've always tried to figure out how does the radical link to the adaptive? And I would see the adaptive sharing economy is Prout 1.0. The radical is Prout 2.0. It's the next step. So this is where the K curve, AI, 3D printing, spiritual medicines, microbiota, nanotech, global local governance change the entire game. You move towards cities designed for transcendence, ownership disappears, smart robots everywhere, and we move from I am to becoming. At the macro level, it rethinks evolution, which is about evolution, survival of the fittest, to, in fact, we have evolution now going on in 3 phases simultaneously. There's human, nature, and consciousness in coevolution. So this is quite dramatic. Humans, nature, and consciousness in coevolution. So I remember we had a group, Humanity 3000. This was a mixture of leading physicists, geneticists, and social scientists. And the whole idea, we've entered the stage of conscious evolution. Evolution cannot be left to chance, but it can't be left to world leaders who obviously, from we can see, are suffering trauma. So their brains, they react from trauma, not from vision. So this would be my imagination of the microbiota revolution. Again, those of you who read Sarkar, talks about using microbiota to propel rockets, using microbiota to transform the pharmaceutical industry. So it's very much a different type of future that links the tech K-curves with the spiritual innovation. And I'm still trying to get a handle on that. Those of you who are good at this, it'd be great to keep on writing about that and figuring out what that means. But I would see as Prout 2.0. Prout 1.0, we argue everyone gets a job, everyone has purpose, everyone has meaning. Prout 2.0, as you know, Sarkar argues, in fact, you're only working 4 hours a day, perhaps even 4 hours a week. So quite a different system. And how do you reconcile the two? I reconcile it by different stages in human futures, 1.0 and 2.0, adaptive and radical change. So simply put as one chart, if you think about the futures of the world economic system, you move from invisible hands, Smith, to visible hands, what's happened in East Asia, Japan, Korea, those amazing revolutions, as well as Sweden, Norway, Finland. Then you move towards the new club, shared hands, the Prout 1.0 model. And finally, after the club, Prout 2.0, this is basically an entire world economy based on abundance. This magical hands is an ecology of spirituality, which you might call green robots for all. So very much a transition. And of course, this is a hopeful transition. So I don't really argue with World Economic Forum people when they say, let's expand the membership. I go, yes, but what's after the club? And that becomes a far more interesting argument. What I learned from Lakoff's work is never argue with someone, because then you've entered their frame. Change the frame, so the discussions have now shifted. So you always reframe, find a new narrative, and then now the terms of the debate have shifted in areas that you wish to focus on. That does not mean as we go through these phases, if we go through these phases, it's painless. Gramsci is still one of my favorites. The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this intergram, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Whether it's COVID, the two wars we have going on now, world poverty, those are examples, not just of wars between nations, they're examples of the entire system being in trouble, inability to understand how pandemics appear and reappear, inability to solve the problems of the nation-state system. So what do? Well, first is getting clear on the vision. That's something everyone in this room can offer. Of course, we focus on what's wrong, but getting clear on the vision is critical. And work with WHO and other organizations. The language I've enjoyed is the addict to healthy again, the industrial city to the ecological green cities. There's no agreements to, in fact, what many people don't like, and I know many people in left groups don't like this, it's strict global agreements, implementable agreements. And finally, seeing climate change not as depression, but actually this can help us transform. We don't go towards extinction, we go towards transformation. So this is always giving a vision of possibility, again, echoing Sarkar, the future's bright, brighter than you can see. I had one of my colleagues, I said, well, can you do this as one image? How do you put together the entire future of the world system from a Prout view as one image? And she did this, and I quite like it. It's industrial, so this is Prout 2.0. Balanced leadership. 5P bottom line, global governance, gender cooperation, new humanism, plant-based, etc. So it's less versus more as opposed to a fixed state. Again, seeing Prama as dynamic equilibrium. Now that's the world economic part. Underneath that has to be a political structure. Many people in the left groups rightly want decentralized because they don't trust the trauma of leaders. But in this model, following Kardashev, there is a planetary confederation. And this is a UN 3.0, which I think we're in the midst of seeing the possibility of being born. That's a certainty, but clearly the possibility. What could it look like? Obviously, it needs to include citizens, international organizations, towards large regions, nations, and even businesses. Clearly, it has to deconstruct AI, which is often for the bad, but AI for the good. Again, the book the algorithms of oppression versus AI for the global good. And has to build, nature has to be built in the world constitution. If you've had a look at Chandrasekhar's work on the world constitution, it's quite brilliant and very critical to next steps. Now, I often get asked, I would say on a regular basis, well, what do you think about X? Now, I don't want to insult anyone here, so I sometimes get caught in those debates. What do I think about Modi or Trump or this or that? And really what I'm trying to do now, since these are such emotive debates, is say, well, actually, it doesn't matter what I think. My thinking is irrelevant to this. What's relevant is within the Prout framework, what's the best criteria? What's the criteria? So that's what I ask. First, is the leader, the organization, whatever you believe in, do they have a maxi mini system? There's just like a springboard. So no one falls through and the spring goes them towards their greater possibility. Is it humanistic? Or do you believe in nation states, religions in a narrow way, as opposed to the deeper part of who we are? Is there gender equity? Are you still focused? Can you move towards confederation, a planetary system? Is there a spiritual practice? I have a few more of those of you who've seen Prout and Power. There's a criteria, so you're not engaged in often useless debates with people. Said, okay, make up your own mind on these leaders, but follow the Prout criteria. That's a solid way. As everything changes, we have to have anchors. Here's 5 anchors. And I think everyone in the room could actually develop some more anchors. I'd be interested to see what are some additional anchors. In fact, let's go to chat right now. Here's 5 anchors. In terms of a criteria to be able to evaluate people, movements, what are some additional anchors you would like to add there within the Prout framework? I put keep the money rolling, keep identity fluid, gender prosperity, inclusion, beyond geopolitics of the nation state, and spiritual practice. Those seem to be 5 good ones, but clearly I'm missing something. What would you add as a 6th or 7th anchor? Okay, harmony with the natural world. Great one from Satya there. Emotionally balanced, yeah. Have they worked through their trauma? They've done inner work. Maxi mini in a nation state level of here's how much you're allowed to make, and here's the least you can make. Meaning money's flowing and fluid, a 1-to-7 ratio or 1-to-10, clearly not 1 to a billion. Ravi suggests decentralized planning. Alberta suggests sustainability. Clearly there's localized systems as a criteria, and the role of nature. And the third one, which is quite interesting, is a criteria for leadership itself. Is this person mindful of their own trauma? Or is what they're doing is disowning their pain so it gets projected on others? I mean, from my point of view, you could see my view of, for example, Hamas leaders, Bibi, Trump, or Modi, for example, but you can have your own list. That's fantastic. Yeah, given that there will be some exploitation, how do we reduce it? And the role of compassion, Buddhist economics. So now we've taken some 5 criteria, you've added some more. So again, I'm suggesting instead of these often useless debates with people, who should I vote for, who should I believe, or find a criteria, use their criteria for your own politics. Thank you. Now, so this is macro stuff, big picture. So I'll just spend a few minutes. What do you do on the ground then? And it may be of interest, John. I'm happy to talk about that, or I'm happy to stop now. This was the big picture Prout stuff. Then the issue is, how do you do futures work with the Prout lens in day-to-day organizations? How do you try to make a difference? Should I do that, John, or just stop? Please advise.
Let's see if there's interest in pursuing that, or I'll defer to you. Do people have thoughts along those lines that they'd like to share?
These are case studies when you're trying to do Prout work. How do you make it happen? And I don't really need to go there. We've done the big picture stuff. Okay, Nina suggests yes, so I'll go with that. Okay, 2. So part of our work is this big picture, then how do we get it to this meso stuff? So I know with Interpol, the pitch we've made is AI, other technologies ensure organized crime thrives. I've been in workshops where a senior agent says, watch me use Bitcoin to buy 5 semi-automatic rifles in 15 seconds through the dark web. And then we try to say, okay, so law enforcement is always behind. So my work in law enforcement now 15, 16 years at almost every level has been that policing can help in the transition. It has to move from essentially Interpol to Earthpol, doing the policing in terms of the deficits we'll see from climate change. I was working with the Queensland Crime and Corruption Commission, and they're so focused on today's crimes and corruption. When we did the workshop, they said, oh my God, we're actually in the moment, a historical moment, where corruption is about to transform dramatically for the worse. We said, how do we, as 60 very idealistic attorneys, ensure that we're on top of the new corruption, especially green corruption? That's what we're going to see, sustainability corruption. We have to have measurements to stop people greenwashing. And we could see with AI, ChatGPT being used to target vulnerable children through quick information. So this became, how do we stay on top? And my meta thing was, of course, how to move from today's issues to tomorrow's issues and help transform the largest security force in the world. And so you just try to do what you can, do mindfulness, meditation, get the vision clear, find people working together as much as possible. There's always jurisdictional battles. When we have leaders group at the very highest level, there's always issues between where we wish to go and the brutal realities of the present, as we did in one meeting on Black Lives Matter. International police needs to take a position here versus, well, if we do, one country will stop funding. And so we see in the global system, anytime there's a move towards progressive politics, large players, whom they are, use punishment, sticks, to ensure the old system stays alive. So when I was working on the George Floyd issue, again, we said, well, right now we're in a story of white space. Let's move to Black Lives Matter and finally in humanism, no one left behind. So this is the type of projects you try to infect, work with people, and help the organization try to find something else. My colleague Ivana Milojevic, myself, we worked with the Asia Development Bank. That started 7 years ago when they understood they were caught in infrastructure, how to become a knowledge bank. So you go towards, and why are they doing this? Because challenge from the Chinese banks, as well as Asian nations getting richer. And the best part of this, they start to move futures and foresight throughout all their activities with some success. The most interesting for me was going from funding the past to slowly funding the future to issuing the first gender bond in the world. So this is not causative, this is correlation. You do workshops, you do speeches, you find people in the organization who are inspired, and they start to use tools and methods to start to rethink the purpose of the bank. So you fund the disruption, you fund peer-to-peer, you start to fund solar energy, you fund gender equity. So this is kind of from funding the past, you fund the possible future, and of course you always engage in inner futures. So in one workshop, the workshop doesn't mean strategy changes, but it pushes it. You're talking about counting women, the politics of representation, to women count, the ethics of transformation. So there's a narrative shift along with the HR shift. With a car company, we said, well, how do we get them to go from SUV world to something else? As the scenario process had them move from bigger and bolder to tailored cars to the more interesting green driverless pods. So how do you get a car company to actually focus on partnering with large cities to create driverless pods, green pods that move quickly along, and even the poor can have access to them? And finally, with every group, we try to ask the radical question, what's after? Going from selling cars to selling mobility. How do you transform your core story, your core purpose? So if you do that well, you can start to see some change over time. I think Uruguay, I just saw on Facebook, has made an amazing shift to renewables. With many organizations throughout the Asia-Pacific region, we've been working with them to go from keeping the lights on to connecting your home and community to choose your own energy adventure. Australia is now at a point where during some parts of the day, they have to pay consumers to use electricity because the national energy market is no longer stable because everyone shifted to solar so quick. So we're starting a 3-month project with the national energy markets to say, what do you do once you move towards full solar? Renewability has its own problem because now suddenly you've gone from scarcity to abundance. How do you manage abundance? The last part we try to do is the critical reflection. So the old model was we do to you. So international development agencies, all the good, nice, caring, loving agencies, Caritas, Red Cross, etc. It's we do things to you instead of we co-create. So this is the mindful activist. I'm going to skip this one and conclude with one of this person. So many organizations, their senior executives and their story is being handcuffed. Great ideas which can't be implemented because there's the wrong story or the structure of the system is past-based. So we try to help them change their personal story. In this case, from golden handcuffs to the Midas touch. But my favorite story was with the young detective. He said he was an iPhone in a room full of Nokias. Law enforcement still focused on driving cars around, harassing minorities instead of using prevention and cyber safety to figure out where are the future crimes. And as he worked through this, he realized his story was inappropriate. It was still full of hierarchy. So he changed the story to the co-created chipmaker. Now he's not better than people, as Sarkar says, neither above nor below the superior inferiority complex, but working with people towards prevention. Then we took him through a meditative state. He said what he saw was a warm, bright sun. His conclusion was, much as Maya Angelou, it's not how smart you are, but how you make people feel. And his conclusion was the core skill set in any organization, of course, is technological skills, but the core skill set will always be spiritual and emotional skills. So concluding here, let's go back. It's movement. We're moving personally, we're moving collectively. And we're trying to create this new vision of the future. Thanks so much. I hope that was useful. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Dada.
We invite people, if people have questions or comments, please raise your hand, and a couple of us will try and keep track of who's wanting to make a comment. Alan.
Alan, you're on mute.
Towards one, I appreciate that presentation a lot. And you sit up front, you go fast, and we can go back and look at it. And that's definitely true. It was quite fast. But towards the end, I started making a mental shift, start thinking about the context of the people that I've been involved with Prout at the Prout Alliance, and sort of given my work in the community development NGO sector and in the anti-poverty sector in America, I've always been concerned about capacity building with Prout institutions here in the United States. So with that wide array of ideas, do you have any suggestions, thoughts on how we can collectively accelerate our capacity for change, collectively accelerate something? Your ideas are far beyond the realm of what I've envisioned, but I still wouldn't mind some kind of guidance on a practical level, where we are now, where we want to go collectively as a Prout Alliance, et cetera.
I mean, one is the personal part, right? Getting clear on your life narrative. Here's my personal contribution. Here's my story. Here's what I'm here for. Here's what I intend to do. It can be planetary, it can be spiritual, whatever it is. That clarity is first. Then the second thing in any organization, it's always for me getting clear on the shared narrative. Is there a story, is a metaphor, and a vision of where we're going? Because in every movement, as you know, there's always gossip, difficulties, anger, all that stuff happens, right? Endless meetings. So for me, it's always getting clear. Here's where we wish to go. Here's my personal story. What's the narrative? Now, within that, I think Sarkar's, is very clear advice. Always find something concrete you can work on. So we're always trying to do both, something macro. Here's our role in the changing world economy. And here's a particular issue we can work on. Is it we need better tomatoes from the farm? Is it, I mean, it's going to be very quite, the specificity is important because people can hang their hat on that. And the second thing is clarity of shared metaphor and our personal contribution to that. If that's not there, I mean, I've seen organization after organization fall apart. I had one workshop, senior leaders. This is one of my favorite stories. Their metaphor was Cinderella, always waiting for Prince Charming to give funding. That was the kiss. And so we were working on transforming it, and one of the vice presidents who got very angry, furious actually, and by 3:30, she was quite irritated. And I said, why are you so upset? And she says, well, don't you know I'm the wicked stepsister? And so it became very clear her role was to sabotage all innovation. And so I was unable, due to my fear of her, to help her transform her own story to become the fairy godmother or some other better narrative for their organization. So I was unable to do that. The negative microvita stayed current. So often that's where I try to focus on. But again, Alan, it'd be for you what's wisest for you.
Thank you.
I think so.
Yeah, Mahadev.
Namaskar. So good to see you, brother.
It's been decades.
Yeah, wonderful presentation. So
Mark.
what is wonderful about your work is how you integrate Proutist concepts and Sarkar's ideology into a deeply refined intellectual analysis of what's happening in the world and where we need to go. So of the more specific Proutist concepts that you weave into your work, which ones do you find the most receptivity for? In other words, in terms of translating our ideology into what will influence and impact decision makers, where do you think we should be putting our efforts into because we're going to get the most traction?
So again, I wish I could say here, I mean, here's the quick answer. But again, I find myself in issues of specificity. I know with one large international development bank, long meeting, and at the end he said, look, I'm a very conservative bank president. Why should I change our entire purpose and go towards this well-being stuff? I just like to lend money. And then it was really clear. And I said, well, and I remember Sarkar's work, well, have them try. Just have people move a little bit towards the light. And so the conclusion was, well, how about you experiment? And he could understand that. He said, okay, that doesn't have me such a shift. I can experiment there. So then he gave, I think, about $1 million to start a whole range of innovation, actually innovative projects. So in every system, I'm looking for the leverage points. Sometimes it's just the change agent has a story, and that story needs to be addressed. They're not sure what their role is. So then we try to find an actual metaphor that works, that gives them power. My experience is most organizations have very idealistic people. They're about 20, 30, 40%, and we have empirical research on that. My goal is to find who they are and give them tools and methods so they can help move the rest of the ship. So that's at the level I can manage. Some people try to bring entire nation states together and shift them. That's way beyond me. I can't handle that much. I can't hold that in my mind. I can't hold the conflicts. And everyone's too important. They're very important people. So I try to find the medium important and work with them in terms of their vision. And I know what they like is big picture because they're lost. Not always lost, but they're confused what to do next. So scenarios, macrohistory, social cycle, that really helps. Personal, how do I find some bliss in my day? The metaphor, mantra work, meditation work, that really helps. When it gets going, I have to say the Sarkar game is lightning. It ignites the entire organization. If you ever want to make a difference, if you have a day or two, run the Sarkar game. they'll figure out straight away what's their weakness. Is it lack of money? Is it lack of strength, warrior strength? Is it lack of service? Is it too many intellectuals? Is there not enough intellectuals? And it gets very clear what's actually going on. Because there's the stated vision, what they're saying. When we had police meetings, everyone says, let's harmonize. When we play the Sarkar game, I know in a few times the FBI agent quickly shot all the Europeans within like 10 seconds of the game starting. And the conclusion was you're talking harmony, but in fact, everyone's protecting their turf and you can't create a better integrated system then. And the game showed that in people's faces.
So kind of what I'm hearing you say is you need to identify the agents of change within any system and then give them the tools and resources and framework in which to create that change.
Yeah, that seems to, yeah. And then just see it as an experiment. I mean, some people are different, right? They're like, this is how you will do it. I've never been so good at that.
James. You're muted. James, you're muted.
Namaskar, Sohail. I've got a question that builds on the last one, I think. What do you see as the future of democracy in the world?
I'm conflicted, I have to say. It's caught, I mean, I know where I'd like. So I grew up very much more democracy, always better, because it brings the voice of the people, right? That was always kind of my personal people I would hang out with. In political science, it was always more democracy, more democracy. And then we've seen in the last crisis, the COVID crisis, when experts disappear, things fall apart very quickly. The power of Mr. Trump to say code will disappear in 2 months, and 1 million people lost their lives in the US. So then is it more democracy? Is it wiser leadership? So I think the whole system is in flux. And I actually I think that would be clearly the peer-to-peer with AI is going to transform it. The group in Bangkok I found very interesting. They said, we have to rewrite the Constitution. How do we do it? Well, we want more people involved, but we also want wiser people involved, and we also want AI to help. So it's somewhere around there. I don't really have a clear answer there. Imagining a world governance system beyond the nation state, clearly you have to have citizens involved. How do you get 8 billion citizens involved? And how do you ensure there's checks and balances so one group doesn't take over? But how do we ensure one nation doesn't take over? So I think all those things are up for grabs right now. So if you have idea, James, I think write them down and start to think about that.
Thank you.
Doris.
Nice to see you, Subodh. What's the Sarkar game? I hear you talking about the Sarkar game.
I can send you articles, but I think it's worth reading. You can go to our website, metafuture.org. It's very simple. When you have trust, you have a script invented by Peter Hayward and Joe Boris. And the first group gets tools, and they start to do something with those tools. The second group gets weapons. They enter the game, and they either protect or they start to kill people. The third group comes in with ideas and books. They either innovate, inspire, or they give long lectures on theocracy. The fourth group comes in with money. Either they invest in people or they try to get everyone to work and they don't pay anyone. And that rotates until finally at the end, every once in a while, 4 or 5 people say, aha, let's create a successful organization or civilization. And there's a moment everyone gets it. There's also many moments. I've had one moment with a mental health group. One of the caseworkers just stood up, took out a gun, and shot the other 30 people in the room. And then we did the feedback, and people said, Christy, it appears you're a sociopath. And she goes, no, I'm not. I'm the angel of light. This group was about to be progressive, and I can see now they're going back to what they always did. They're reverting back. And there's no way I'm going to allow people with lived experience to want to suffer more. I'd rather everyone die. And so, so the workshop went from very interesting ideas to, okay, now we're all in trauma. And the conclusion of that workshop was a few months later, they fired the CEO. They said, this person cannot take it to the next level. It's very clear. And the Sarkar game showed that. It's not to be done lightly. It's a very powerful game, and you have people know how to do it and ensure there's a safe space. Otherwise, you'll get things you don't anticipate. If you do it well, it creates a new leadership group. Read some of the articles, and there's some videos on it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doris.
Craig.
Craig, our Constitution writer, unmute, please.
Very, very nice presentation, Shibot. I always enjoy listening to you very much and getting to see you. You know, it's interesting. The last part of the title of the program was The Great Transition. And sometimes it feels like it's so hard to envision a change from, you know, the monolithic capitalism, the growing sort of authoritarian regimes and so forth. But at the same time, I think it's not just people that will be contributing to transitions or the circumstances within which transitions can happen, but also the Earth itself, the climate change example. It could really shake the foundations of everything we know. I remember the book by Paul Gilding called The Great Disruption, which suggested that climate change or other things could shake things up so much that people will be open to, you know, Prout 2.0 ideas much sooner than they might have otherwise. And so it gives me some additional optimism that, you know, very positive changes can come, even though they seem very daunting. So that's
I mean, if you remember Sheikh Yamani, he's passed away, but he had a great quote, which I used a lot. And he said, the Stone Age did not end due to lack of stone. He was the OPEC oil minister, and the oil age will not end due to lack of oil. So sometimes people start to imagine the future, forgetting the old will still stay, but the narrative will shift. There'll be a new dominant way of thinking about things. And so in our framework, our role, everyone in this room, is to say, well, when there's confusion, is AI going to be good or bad? So in every workshop I've done, it ends up saying, okay, let's see AI critically. It's going to amplify inequity. How do we create an AI for the greater good? So that leaves as the meme, as opposed to AI will be the best thing ever versus AI is dystopian. So our role is always to bring the core Prout ideas to bear on every new technology, every new social disruption, and that clarity is the gift.
You know, and I think that people at some point, particularly if whether the environmental circumstances or other social circumstances become more extreme, people would be more open to hearing these kind of alternative ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair hypothesis. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, and maybe we'll see if other people want to comment, but we want to be sensitive to your time.
Yep.
It's
3 more
getting
minutes.
late in the day for you. Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Craig was bringing up. I think, you know, Sarkar at times has made reference to opportune moments. And I think increasingly some of us are starting to recognize that you know, severe disruption, again, to Craig's point, really kind of shakes people up and they are more open to change. In other words, people live lives of habit. And when something totally disrupts that, then all bets are off and they start, you know, exploring other alternatives and ways of being. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, kind of maybe an extension of what you just shared.
No, I think 100%. I mean, that's the Prama argument, right? There's an equilibrium, the world changes. Do I return to the old equilibrium, or do I innovate and create a new equilibrium? I think, John, you're suggesting it's the opportunity to create a new one. So that's essentially what this is about. And that's the core argument of Prout/futures. We're in a situation, X changes. How do we innovate? How do we co-create something else?
Right. Yeah, there's so much literature about the paradox of severe disruption and the joy people experience. And it's because all of a sudden they can act naturally. You know, the existing system is disrupted. And so how do we work together? And in the default in Homo sapiens is to cooperate, to work together, to solve problems. And you know, and that's often missing, you know, from the paradigm is the ability to capitalize on that innate capacity.
It goes back to what the earlier comment from coach to Sadvipra. That's essentially the process. There's a leadership process, there's a narrative process, and we're engaged in that. I would agree with Niti there. Yeah. So there's macro, the next 1,000 years, micro, how each one of us lives, and the meso, in terms of societies we live in. So there's spirit and there's Prout, and then there's a story that we tell ourselves. That's how you start to link that. And we see, I mean, so many, that suddenly rewriting of the story is what's crucial here. So that's kind of what we're doing. And as Sarkar said, be practical. We're trying to rewrite the story in ways that are experiments, that are tangible, that make a difference people can count. Thanks so much, everyone. I have to crash. I'm on weird time zones and exhausted.
Thank you so much. This has been truly wonderful.
Great meeting. Take care. Bye.